The wind moved differently across the Bitterroot Valley in late March. It did not arrive gently. It came in long, low sweeps across the open fields, pressing against the old fence lines, finding every gap in the barn siding, carrying the last cold of winter in its teeth. The sky stayed gray most mornings. The ground was soft in places, frozen in others, and the whole property had the look of something that had been left alone too long. Elijah Tate worked without stopping. He moved along the fence line with the kind of focus that had nothing to do with the fence itself. The hammer rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Each strike landed clean. He did not rush, did not look toward the road. His hands worked calloused in the specific way that comes from years of work that has nothing to do with farming. And there was a stillness in the way he carried himself that did not belong to this valley. He was 46 years old. His hair had grown out unevenly over the past 14 months. There were things Elijah Tate had stopped noticing since he came back to this land. The cold was one of them. Beside him, Ranger moved. The Belgian Malinois was 6 years old, lean and dense with muscle, his coat the color of dark sand. He had worked alongside Elijah for 4 years before they both left the same federal building for the last time. Ranger did not bark at much. He watched everything, processed it, and acted only when acting was necessary. Ranger went still first, not because of a sound, because of a shift, something at the edge of the property that did not fit the rhythm of the afternoon. Elijah felt it through the dog before he saw it himself. He lowered the hammer and turned. At the far end of the dirt road, near the gate, a woman stood. She had not come up the drive. She was simply there, the way people appear when they have been walking long enough that arriving feels less like a destination and more like the place where their legs finally stop. She was young, 28, maybe. Her hair was natural, pulled back loosely, with strands moving across her face in the wind. She wore a dress that had been clean when she put it on, but that was some hours ago. Dust had settled along the hem and across her shoes. Her shoes were worn thin at the soles. One hand held a suitcase. The leather was cracked at the corners. Her other hand rested against her stomach. She was 7 months along, maybe more. She did not wave. She did not call out. She stood at the gate and waited, as if she understood that the decision of whether to come closer was not hers to make yet. Ranger let out a single low sound from deep in his chest and moved half a step forward. Elijah raised one hand. The dog stopped. The distance closed as Elijah walked toward the gate. He could see her more clearly now. The way she shifted her weight every few seconds. Small adjustments, almost invisible. The way her jaw was set. Not hard, not frightened, just decided. She had been walking for a long time. She met his eyes when he reached the gate. "If you let me stay," she said, "I will work on your farm." Her voice was steady. Not loud, not soft. The kind of voice that had been through enough that it no longer needed to perform anything. "I can cook. I can clean. I can help with whatever needs doing." Elijah did not answer right away. He looked at her the way he had been trained to look at things. Not with suspicion, not with judgment, with attention. There was a difference. He had spent years learning that difference, and then he had spent the last 14 months trying to remember why it still mattered. His eyes moved to her stomach. Something shifted in him. Not dramatically. Just a small internal adjustment. The kind that happens when a person recognizes the weight of a moment before they have decided what to do about it. "You know how to grow something in soil like this?" he asked. She nodded once. "Yes." He reached for the gate latch. The hinges resisted, then gave with a long dry creak that carried across the open field. Ranger stepped back just enough to let her pass. Though his body stayed angled toward her, still reading her, Nadia Broom stepped through the gate. For a moment, the three of them occupied the same space. The wind moved between them. Then Elijah turned and walked toward the house, and after a second, she followed. The front door closed behind her with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. The inside of the house was not dirty. It was simply unused. A jacket hung off the back of a chair with one sleeve touching the floor. Tools were spread across the kitchen table alongside a chipped mug and a folded piece of paper that had been there long enough to have a ring of dust around it. A box sat in the corner, unopened. Nadia said she took a slow look around without comment. Then she walked to the kitchen and picked up the mug first. Elijah stayed near the doorway. Ranger sat a few feet ahead of him, watching her with less tension than he had shown at the gate. The sound of water running filled the sink. A drawer opened and closed. Nadia moved through the space carefully, not trying to change it, just working around what was already there. By the time the light outside had shifted to the flat gray of early evening, the kitchen felt different. Not fixed, steadier. That night she cooked. There was not much to work with. Ground beef, 3 potatoes, half an onion, a few cloves of garlic. But the smell that came from the stove spread through the house in a way that had nothing to do with the ingredients. It filled the hallway. It reached the room at the back where Elijah had been sitting in silence. It settled into the walls, the way smells do in houses that have been missing them. Ranger moved first. He walked into the kitchen and sat near the stove, ears forward, tail resting lightly on the floor. They ate at the same table, across from each other. The quiet stayed, but it did differently now. Less like an absence, more like a choice. When she stood to clear the plates, Elijah spoke for the first time since they sat down. Little heavy on the salt. Nadia looked up. Something moved across her face, brief and almost invisible. Not offense. Something closer to relief. As if a small ordinary criticism was the most normal thing that had happened to her in weeks. "I will fix that," she said. He nodded once and kept eating. It was not much, but it changed something between them. Elijah woke before sunrise the next morning. He stepped out of his room expecting the house to feel the way it always did at that hour. Empty, waiting. It did not. A light came from the kitchen. Low, warm. The sound of something simmering. The soft scrape of a spoon against the side of a pot. Coffee sat on the table fresh. A plate of bread, still warm. Nadia stood at the stove with her back to him. Ranger was already there, lying near the doorway, watching her with his head resting on his paws. Elijah washed his hands at the sink. When he turned back, his mug was already waiting. He sat down, took a sip, and said nothing. But he did not leave right away either. The changes stayed small. Nadia did not rearrange the house. She worked around what was already there, adjusting only what needed it. A towel folded instead of left hanging. A tool placed back on the shelf where it could be found. Eye window opened just enough to let the air move through in the afternoon. Ranger followed her more closely now, not touching, but no longer keeping distance. Sometimes he sat beside her while she worked in the small garden she had cleared behind the house, pressing seeds into the soil with her thumb. Other times he moved ahead of her, checking the space before she stepped into it. Elijah noticed. He did not comment on it. "Now, before we go further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. There is something about knowing who is on the other side of a story that makes the telling of it feel more real. And if this story is reaching something in you, stay with it. The part that matters most is still ahead." That afternoon, while cleaning the room at the end of the hall, Nadia found the photograph. It lay face down on the small table near the window. She stopped. She considered leaving it exactly as it was. Then she turned it over. A man and a woman, dressed for a wedding. The woman leaned into him, her smile open and unguarded. Elijah stood beside her, younger, his expression not quite smiling but present in a way that he no longer was. Nadia looked at the photograph for a few seconds. Then she placed it back exactly as she had found it, face down, in the same position. She did not mention it until that evening. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, the fields dark beyond the fence line. The sky just beginning to show the first stars. Nadia waited a moment before she spoke. "I do not mean to ask something personal," she said. "But the woman in the photograph." Elijah was quiet for a moment. "Then, that was my wife, Cassandra. She lived here." Then she laughed. A pause. "There was someone else. Attorney." Always knew what to say. There was no bitterness in it. Just the flat edge of something that had been sharp once and had worn down over time. Nadia listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer a response designed to make him feel better. After a while, Elijah turned his head slightly toward her. "What about you?" She looked down at her hands. Her fingers rested lightly against each other in her lap. The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. It had weight. It had a shape. "My brother's name is Deshaun," she said finally. "He's 31 years old. He has been in Ravalli County Correctional for 2 years and for months." She paused. "He did not do what they said he did." Elijah did not move. "There was a traffic stop," she continued, 2 years and 7 months ago. Deputy pulled him over on Route 93, 11:40 at night. Deshaun was driving home from his second job. The deputy said he matched a description. He said Deshaun was aggressive. He said he found something in the car. She shook her head slowly. "There was nothing in that car. I know because I helped him clean it that same afternoon." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Just slightly. I filed a complaint," Nadia said. "With the department. With the county. I wrote letters. I found a legal aid attorney who took the case for 3 months and then stopped returning calls." She looked out at the dark fields. "The deputy's name was Pruitt. Vance Pruitt. He has been with the department for 12 years. He has a lot of friends in that building." The name landed in the space between them like something physical. Elijah was very still. "After the complaint," Nadia said, "things started happening. A car parked outside my apartment for 3 nights in a row. My landlord received an anonymous call saying I was a problem tenant. My employer got a visit from a county officer asking questions about me." She pressed her hand flat against her stomach. "The man I was with decided he did not want that kind of trouble. He left in November." She paused. "I held on until I could not anymore. Then I started walking." The porch was quiet for a long moment. "Pruitt," Elijah said. His voice was low and even. "Yes." He looked out at the fence line. Something moved behind his eyes. A recognition, a reckoning, the specific expression of a person who has just understood that 2 separate threads of their life have been the same thread all along. "I know that name," he said. Nadia turned to look at him. "I filed a complaint against Vance Pruitt 14 months ago," Elijah said. "I was a special agent with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. I had been building a case against him for 11 months. Documented pattern of racially motivated stops, falsified reports, suppressed complaints." He paused. 22 complaints before yours. All buried. When I submitted my findings, my supervisor told me the evidence was insufficient. 2 weeks later I was placed on administrative leave. For months after that, my position was eliminated. Nadia stared at him. "Your complaint was the 23rd, he said. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The wind moved across the fields, soft and low. A single light burned in the barn. Ranger lay between them on the porch boards, his eyes open, watching the dark. There are moments when 2 people realize they have not met by accident. Not because of fate or design, but because the same wound can only be carried so far before it finds another person carrying the same one." Elijah had spent 14 months believing his work had ended in failure. Nadia had spent 14 months believing no one had ever listened. They were both wrong. They had simply not yet found each other. The farm continued to change in ways that did not need to be announced. Green shoots pushed through the soil in the garden. The kitchen held warmth now, not just from the stove, but from use, regular and consistent. Ranger had made his decision. He stayed close to Nadia when she worked, lying near the doorway or beside the garden bed, watching without tension. Elijah came inside earlier in the evenings. He did not have a reason he could have named. He just did. One afternoon, a car came up the road. Elijah stepped outside before it reached the gate. Ranger moved ahead of him. The car stopped. The door opened. Cassandra stepped out. She moved quickly, the way people move when they have been rehearsing something and are afraid the rehearsal will run out before they finish. By the time she reached the gate, her voice had already broken. "Elijah, I was wrong. I should not have left. He is not who I thought he was." She pressed her hand flat against the gate. "I still love you. I never stopped." Elijah stood with his hands loose at his sides. The front door opened behind him. Nadia stepped out. Cassandra saw her. Everything stopped. Her eyes moved from Nadia to Elijah, then down, and stayed there. "Who is she?" No one answered. Cassandra's voice sharpened. "Why is she in our house?" A short breath. "That's yours? You moved on that fast?" Nadia spoke before Elijah could. I am just staying here, helping around the place. That is all. Cassandra let out a dry sound, then leave. This is not your place. It never was. Nadia did not respond. She stood there for a second, then turned back toward the house. The door closed behind her. From inside came the sound of movement, drawers, footsteps, the quiet drag of a suitcase across the floor. Elijah took a step forward. Nadia. Cassandra caught his arm. You are really going to let her stay? He pulled his arm free. This is not about her, he said. Then, what is it about? Elijah looked at her. Steady. This place stopped being ours the day you left. Cassandra opened her mouth, then closed it. She stepped back slowly, the fight leaving her shoulders. She turned, walked back to the car, and drove away without looking back. By the time Elijah reached the yard, Nadia was already at the gate. The suitcase dragged slightly behind her, catching on the uneven ground. Ranger stood directly in front of her. He had the handle of the suitcase in his mouth, holding it in place. Nadia looked down at him. Ranger. He did not let go. Elijah reached them a moment later. Stay, he said. Nadia shook her head. I should not. At least until the baby is safe. He glanced toward the road. Out there. You do not have that. She tightened her grip on the handle. I will manage. Elijah paused. He was not a man who found the right words easily. He had spent most of his adult life in rooms where words were chosen with precision and weight, and somewhere along the way he had stopped trusting them in personal conversations. I am not good at asking people to stay, he said, but I do not want you out there on your own right now. That was all he had. Nadia looked at him, then at Ranger. The dog still held the suitcase, patient and immovable. Something in her expression shifted. Not much. Enough. She let out a quiet breath. All right. Ranger released the handle immediately. They walked back together. Not side by side, not apart. Just back. The room at the end of the hall had been closed for a long time. Elijah opened it one morning without announcing anything. He pushed the window up, let the air move through, and got to work. The glass had dulled over months of disuse. He wiped it clean until it caught the light again. The door hinges complained when he tested them, so he replaced them. The bed frame needed reinforcing at 2 of the joints. He tightened every connection, checked each one twice, then once more. Nadia noticed the change without asking. She passed the doorway several times each day, slowing just enough to see what had been done. The shed took longer. It had not been opened properly in over a year. The door stuck halfway before giving. Inside, everything sat where it had been left. Tools, old boards, a few things covered in cloth. Elijah moved through it slowly until he found it near the back. The cradle. It was pushed against the wall, half hidden beneath a worn sheet. He pulled it free and stood there with one hand resting on the edge. He did not move right away. The wood had held its shape well. Solid construction, careful joinery. It had been built by someone who had made it because it was going to be needed, back when that still seemed like a certainty. Back when Cassandra was still here. Back when the future had felt like something he was allowed to have. He brushed the dust away with his palm. He carried it out into the light, set it down, got to work. A cloth, water, a screwdriver. Each corner cleaned, each joint checked, every loose piece tightened until it held again. No pause, no explanation. Just the sound of small repairs being made. Nadia stood at the shed doorway watching. She did not step in. She did not speak. But something in her expression changed the way it does when you recognize a story without being told the details. After a while, she turned and left him to it. The night it happened, the house was quiet. The wind had settled. The fields were still. Ranger heard it first. A short, sharp sound from the room at the end of the hall, enough to cut through the silence. Elijah was already moving before the sound fully registered. Nadia held onto the door frame for a second, her breath uneven but controlled. It is time, she said. He nodded once. All right. No panic. No wasted movement. The truck started within minutes. Ranger climbed into the back without being told. No one spoke on the drive. The road stretched out ahead of them. Empty at that hour, the sky still dark but beginning to shift at the edges. 3:17 in the morning. The hospital lights replaced the dark, clean, bright, unforgiving. Elijah stayed just outside the room at first. Ranger lay near the wall in the waiting area, alert, still. Time moved differently there. Minutes stretched. Sound sharpened. Then it came. A cry. Clear and strong, the kind of sound that does not apologize for itself. Everything else went quiet for a second. A nurse stepped out, her expression calm and warm. "It is a boy." Elijah exhaled slowly, like he had been holding it longer than he realized. Inside, Nadia held the child close, wrapped in white, still warm from the effort of arriving. Elijah stepped closer. The nurse had a clipboard. "Name?" Nadia looked down at the baby, then across the room at Elijah. "Isaiah," she said. The name settled into the space without effort, like it had been waiting there. The days after did not follow a clear pattern. Sleep came in pieces. Time blurred at the edges. But the house changed. Elijah learned it quickly, not perfectly. He held Isaiah with the same careful attention he brought to everything. Steady hands, small adjustments, watching for every reaction. Ranger stayed near the cradle most of the time, lifting his head whenever the baby stirred. Nadia rested more. For the first time since she had arrived, her sleep ran deeper. No sudden waking. No tension in her shoulders when she closed her eyes. One evening, Elijah stood in the doorway watching. Nadia sat beside the cradle, one hand resting lightly on the edge. Ranger lay nearby, eyes half closed but aware. Isaiah shifted, letting out a small sound. Both of them looked up at the same time. Elijah stepped inside. No words. He reached down and adjusted the blanket, making sure it fit right. Nadia did not stop him. Outside, the last light faded from the fields. Inside, the house held something new. Something that did not need to be explained. This is the part of the story where most people would expect things to stay quiet. They do not. The night it happened, the house had finally settled into the fragile rhythm that comes with a newborn in the home. Isaiah slept in shortened, even stretches. Nadia rested nearby, one hand always within reach of the cradle, even in sleep. Elijah sat in the chair by the door, just present. Ranger heard it first. A vehicle engine, uneven, coming up the road too fast and slowing too late before the gate. His head lifted. His ears went forward. A low sound built in his chest. Elijah was already on his feet. The headlights cut across the yard. Too bright, too careless. Voices came next, loud, flat, carrying the specific confidence of men who have never had to consider consequences. Nadia was awake. She pushed herself up slowly, one hand reaching for the cradle before she moved toward the doorway. Elijah stepped outside before the door could be tested. 3 men stood near the gate. One moved ahead of the others. A heavy-set man in a county sheriff's jacket, his badge catching the light. Deputy Vance Pruitt, 41 years old, 12 years on the force in Ravalli County. The man who had planted evidence in Deshaun Broom's car on a Tuesday night on Route 93. The man who had buried 22 complaints before Nadia ever filed hers. The man who had cost Elijah everything he had built over 11 years. Tate. Pruitt's voice was flat. "Heard you had company." He glanced toward the house. "The Broom woman. She has been talking to people she should not be talking to. You understand what I am saying?" Elijah did not answer. Pruitt took a step forward. "This is not a conversation. I am telling you how this goes." Ranger moved. He did not bark. He did not growl. He launched from beside Elijah with the precision of an animal that had been trained for exactly this kind of situation, closing the distance in less than 2 seconds, stopping with his jaws open and his body coiled 3 feet from Pruitt's throat. The deputy froze. The 2 men behind him stepped back immediately. Elijah walked forward. Slow, controlled. He stopped a few feet from Pruitt and looked at him, with the same expression he had worn in that conference room 14 months ago. Calm, certain, unhurried. "You drove onto private property," Elijah said. "At 11:47 at night, with 2 witnesses present." He let that sit for a moment. "I spent 11 years documenting what people like you do when they think no one is watching." A pause. 23 complaints. Vance. 23 people who told the truth and were buried. Deshaun Broom is one of them. His sister is inside that house with a newborn child. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. I have had everything I need for 14 months. I have just been waiting for you to give me a reason to finish it. The silence that followed was the kind that changes things. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Ranger. Then he stepped back. Then again. The two men behind him were already moving toward the vehicle. The engine started. Gravel kicked up as they pulled away. The yard went still. Ranger did not move until the sound of the engine had completely disappeared. Then he stepped back and returned to Elijah's side, calm, as if nothing of particular significance had occurred. Inside, Nadia stood in the same spot. For a moment she did not move. Then something broke in her, not loudly, not suddenly. She sank into the chair near the window and covered her face with both hands. The tears came quietly, the kind that have nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with the accumulated weight of 2 years and 7 months of fear finally finding somewhere to go. Elijah stepped inside. He did not reach for her. He did not try to stop it. He stood close enough to be present. After a while, she lowered her hands. Her breathing was still uneven. "He will not stop," she said. Elijah shook his head once. "He already has." She looked at him. "How do you know?" He met her eyes. "Because he knows what I have. And he knows I am no longer waiting. What happened next took months, not days." Elijah made one phone call the following morning. Not to threaten anyone. Not to announce anything. He called a former colleague at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division in Washington and sent for words. "I am ready now." The investigation that followed was not dramatic. It did not happen in a single hearing or a single revelation. It happened the way real accountability happens, slowly, methodically, through the accumulation of documented evidence that had been waiting in filing cabinets and digital archives for years. 23 complaints. 11 of them involved use of force incidents classified as justified without independent review. 4 involved falsified reports. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look at it without the protection of institutional loyalty. Deshaun Broom's case was among the first reviewed. The evidence used to convict him was re-examined by an independent forensic team. The chain of custody had 3 gaps that had never been explained. The arresting officer's body camera had been turned off 17 minutes before the stop was logged. A witness who had been present that night on Route 93, a woman who had been parked at the gas station across the road, came forward. She had not spoken before because no one had ever asked her. Deshaun Broom walked out of Ravalli County Correctional on a Thursday morning in early August. Nadia was there. Isaiah was in her arms, 3 months old, blinking at the morning light. Deshaun stopped when he saw them. He stood there for a moment, not moving the way a person stands when they have been preparing themselves for something and the reality of it is still larger than the preparation. Then he crossed the parking lot and held his sister for a long time without saying anything. Isaiah reached out and grabbed his uncle's finger. Deputy Vance Pruitt was placed on administrative leave in early June. He was indicted on federal charges of civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice in September. The trial lasted 11 days. The verdict took the jury for hours and 17 minutes. He was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison. The Ravalli County Sheriff's Department implemented mandatory body cameras with independent server uploads 6 months later. A civilian oversight board was established. 3 other deputies resigned during the investigation. The department issued a formal apology to each of the 23 individuals whose complaints had been suppressed. None of this made the front page of any national newspaper. It rarely does. But in the communities where Pruitt had operated for 12 years, people knew. And knowing mattered. Cassandra came back one last time. No raised voice. No argument waiting behind her eyes. She stood at the gate in the early evening, holding something in both hands. Elijah stepped out to meet her. "I am not here to stay," she said. He nodded. She held out a small bundle, a soft blanket, pale yellow, neatly folded. For the baby, he took it. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The light was going flat across the fields, the way it does in October when the season is finishing itself. Then she gave a short nod, turned, and walked back to her car. Elijah stood there a moment longer. "Thank you, Cassandra," he said quietly. He He carried the blanket inside and set it near the cradle. Nadia glanced at him, then at the blanket. She adjusted it around Isaiah without a word. A small smile settled in, the kind that does not need an audience. The wedding came together without much planning. Word moved across the Bitterroot Valley the way it always does in places where people have known each other long enough to stop needing formal invitations. Those who had once stood at the edge of the property watching with curiosity now came through the gate with their hands full. Those who had kept their distance now moved chairs and set tables and stayed longer than expected. Delroy Sims arrived early with tools already in hand, fixing the gate latch he had once said would not last another season. Bernardito Kafer took over the kitchen without asking permission. Marcus Wynn built a canopy in the yard, steady and level. No one mentioned the past. Nadia stood beside Elijah when it was time. No long vows, no speeches prepared in advance. Just a few words spoken clearly, in front of people who had watched this thing build from nothing and understood what it had cost. Ranger stayed close, a strip of cloth tied loosely around his neck, still and watchful. Deshawn sat in the front row. He had been out for 6 weeks. He was still adjusting to the size of open spaces, to the sound of wind without walls around it, to the particular freedom of being able to stand up and walk somewhere without asking anyone. He watched his sister and the man beside her, and something in his expression settled in a way it had not since before the night on Route 93. When it was over, no one rushed off. Plates passed from hand to hand. Voices settled into something easy. The fields held the last of the afternoon light. Spring came back around. The ground softened again. The garden behind the house showed new growth. More of it this year, the soil better for having been worked. Inside the house, things shifted once more. Nadia stood in the kitchen doorway one morning, holding something in her hands. Elijah looked up from the table. She did not say it right away. Then she did. "I am pregnant." He did not move for a second. Then he stood, crossed the kitchen, and stopped in front of her. He looked at her the way he had learned to look at things that mattered, with full attention, without hurry. "All right," he said. It was the same word he had used the night Isaiah was born, but this time it held something different, something that had been built, slowly, through 14 months of small, consistent actions, through a dog who would not release a suitcase, through a cradle carried out of a shed and restored in the afternoon light, through a phone call that had taken 14 months to make. When the baby came, it was a girl. They named her Ava. Elijah stood in the yard that evening, watching the lights settle over the fields. Ranger sat beside him. From inside the house came the sound of Nadia's voice, low and steady, and beneath it, the small sounds of 2 children in the same room, and further back, the sound of Deshawn laughing at something, the specific laugh of a man who has remembered how. He had spent 11 years believing that the most important thing he could do was document what was wrong, file the reports, build the case, hold the line. And that work had mattered. It had cost him almost everything. And it had still mattered because the 23 people whose complaints had been buried now had something they had not had before. A record, a verdict, a name attached to what had been done to them. But standing in the yard in the October light, he understood something he had not understood when he was sitting in federal buildings with folders full of evidence. Justice is not only what happens in courtrooms. It is also what happens when a man opens a gate, when a dog refuses to let go, when a person who has every reason to stay closed chooses, instead, to stay open. He had thought that keeping people out was how you protected yourself. He understood it differently now. Some people leave. That part does not change. But sometimes someone arrives at a gate with a cracked suitcase and a child on the way, and a story that turns out to be the other half of yours. And if you are paying attention, if you have not let the damage make you permanently blind, you recognize it for what it is. Not a burden, a beginning. There are moments in life that do not arrive with thunder. They come quietly, like a stranger at a gate, like a hand that does not turn away, like a house that opens when it could have stayed closed. Elijah had believed that strength meant standing alone. What changed his life was not force. It was not the federal case, or the verdict, or the 9 years Pruitt would serve. Those things mattered, but they did not change him. What changed him was the courage to let someone stay. And in that choice, something began to work that no investigation could have produced. A broken place softened. A guarded heart learned, slowly and imperfectly, to trust again. A family took shape where there had only been silence and old furniture and a cradle in a shed that had been waiting longer than anyone knew. For those listening tonight, perhaps there is a gate in your own life that has been closed for a long time. Perhaps there is someone who needs a little space, or a little patience, or simply the experience of not being turned away. You do not have to do much. Sometimes, not turning away is enough. If this story stayed with you, you are welcome to share it with someone who might need it. Leave a thought in the comments. I read them more carefully than you might expect. And if you would like to hear more stories like this one, you are welcome to stay. May you find the courage to open what has been closed. May the people who belong in your life find their way to your gate. And may you have the wisdom to recognize them when they arrive. ANOTFROMTHESTO or YTELLER. This story is a work of fiction. Elijah, Nadia, Isaiah, Ava, Deshawn, Ranger, and all other characters in this narrative are entirely invented. The Bitterroot Valley is a real place in western Montana, used here as a setting only. Any resemblance of fictional characters to real individuals, living or deceased, is entirely unintentional. The systemic issues referenced in this story, including the documented pattern of suppressed misconduct complaints in law enforcement, the psychological impact of institutional retaliation on whistleblowers, and the disproportionate targeting of Black Americans in policing contexts, are real and well documented. Studies by the Stanford Open Policing Project found that Black drivers are stopped at significantly higher rates than white drivers across the United States. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than white Americans. The Government Accountability Project has documented that more than 60% of law enforcement whistleblowers face retaliation after reporting misconduct. Fiction can hold truth without being factual. This story is an attempt to do exactly that. The 23 complaints Elijah mentions are fictional, but the pattern they represent is not. If you have experienced or witnessed misconduct, document it, report it, find an advocate. Your record matters, even when it feels like no one is listening. The cradle in the shed is real in the way that all the things we build for futures that did not arrive are real. They do not disappear, they wait. And sometimes, they find the purpose they were always meant for. Thank you for listening to the end.